Chapter 4. Thief No More. Daylight came, seeming to work its way just under the edge of the makeshift tent and shine across Machwa's face. At first he tried to ignore it, but the dreams that had gripped him would not return, so he opened his eyes. He found himself alone in the shelter, and he was the victim of a big yawn as he sat up to survey his surroundings. Not far from the tent, on the edge of the road, Saruth had built a small fire and was cooking some breakfast. It was downwind, so Machwa couldn't smell it, but his mouth watered anyway at the sight of the fruit Saruth was slicing and putting into the pan. Before Machwa even gathered himself to move from the bed, the ever-attentive Saruth glanced his way. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" Machwa yawned again, and his many teeth gleamed in the morning light that beamed through the tent before his muzzle snapped shut. "Mm-hmm." Saruth laughed and sliced another piece of fruit into the pan. "I hope you like fruit for breakfast. It's very healthy for you. The living forces in it give your body the ability to better digest other things." Machwa groaned, lay back down, and covered his head with his cloak. He hadn't been awake for more than 2 minutes, and Saruth was already trying to broaden his horizons with a lesson on nutrition. The man laughed a beautiful laugh, which made it that much more annoying. He poked a small knife into one of the warmed, seasoned pieces of fruit and walked over to kneel down and wave it near the open edge of the cloak that covered Machwa. There was the sound of a rumbling belly, followed by a hand reaching out and snatching the fruit from the knife with a single claw. Silence came, and then chewing sounds. Machwa bolted upright and licked his lips with his eyes wide. He looked at the knife, and then at the pan, and then back at Saruth. "Okay, you can teach me anything you want if you give me more of that." Saruth burst into laughter and covered his mirthful expression with his left hand while using the small cooking knife in his right to point to the pan of still sizzling spiced fruit. That was all the encouragement Machwa needed. Once they were on their way, Machwa looked around and noticed that the trees seemed to be getting thicker and the undergrowth denser. The high trees were now shorter, though. Soon the road grew a bit higher, and the forest seemed to sink along both sides. It was then that Machwa realized they were within the borders of the swamplands. It wasn't long before they came upon a large sign on the roadside that was marked in several written scripts and glyphs. Saruth pointed up ahead and read it to Machwa. "Welcome to the nation of Regenta, home of the great Tortangas and much happy life. Travelers beware of the creatures of the swamp. Stay on the roads and ask any watchman for help should you need it. From this place it is 1/2 day's travel to Optinoth." Machwa made a face followed by a snort. "Saruth, what kind of a silly name for a town is Optinoth?" The man shrugged. "Who'd call the city Barumath?" Machwa blinked. He opened his mouth to answer, only to find that he had nothing good to say, so his ears slid sidelong and he shut his muzzle. Saruth's face showed amiable humor. "To some a name seems silly, especially if they've come from other places, but to those who name a place, the name becomes as normal as the water they drink or the food they eat. Indeed, many places are just named things like Great River, Hot Waters, Nice Valley, or Sea View, in different foreign words. Your own city is actually named in the tongue of the ancient Najans. It means Great Ocean, or thereabouts. They named it that because when they arrived that's what they saw. They had come to the Great Ocean, and they settled there on its edge. I'm sure it made sense at the time." Saruth smiled at him. "To make fun of a foreign name is as silly as making fun of your own, I should think." Machwa nodded and crossed his arms as he laid one ear back at the gentle reprimand. Soon the two travelers came to a large dock on the side of the road. The raised platform had buildings on it that housed an inn and a small market. There was a clearing beside the platform at water level where a canal led into the distance. There were log barges moving along the small waterway and men with long poles pushing them through the still waters. Some drew closer and had piles of goods on them, furs or fish of some sort, or sweet cane. "Machwa?" He turned to look at Saruth. Saruth smiled and pointed to the inn. "Would you like to stop for a while and stretch your legs?" Machwa nodded and hopped from the cart as it came to a halt. Saruth went into one of the shops and began talking to a merchant, leaving Machwa to his own devices. As he looked around, he spied a wealthy traveler about to enter the market, his brightly colored tunic and the jingle of his coins obvious. He watched as the man went into one of the small shops and began looking around. The thief in Machwa called to him, his fingers itching with the urge to hold the coins of the stranger. Visions of food danced in his head as he slipped closer, with an intent to pick the rich man's pocket. His claws slid from his soft fingertips as he moved within reach. Then, at the moment where he could take what he thought he wanted, he stopped. It had never happened before, and Machwa blinked, still in the moment as he was about to reach for the purse of the other man. He thought about what Saruth might say if he knew he was stealing. He also thought about the fact that his belly was full, and that Saruth had never failed to take care of his hunger. A moment before he retracted his claws into his fingertips, the shopkeeper caught sight of him. "Thief! Stop, you money-grabbing fazooga!" Machwa held up both hands, claws hidden, his eyes wide as he struggled to speak. No, I'm not. I haven't taken his money." The rich man turned to Machwa and glared. "After my purse, were you?" It was more of an accusation than a question. Machwa took a step back, his tail lashing as he thought about running. Everything in him screamed for him to flee, but he also felt something he hadn't felt before. Pride. He hadn't taken anything, so he shouldn't have to run. Standing transfixed, he watched as the shopkeeper brandished a club and came at him. The club was lifted, and Machwa closed his eyes, cringing as he held up his hands to protect himself from the upcoming blow. There was no pain, no force, only the sudden sound of wood impacting wood. Machwa's eyes flew open, and he saw a staff blocking the club. "Good sir, what has this youngster done that you would try to strike him so?" The shopkeeper and rich man exploded into words at the same time, claiming that Machwa was trying to steal and got caught in the act. Saruth looked down somewhat over Machwa's shoulder and lifted a brow. "Machwa, is this true?" Machwa's ears tipped to either side. Was it? Saruth's tongue slid over his own nose, and he leaned in a little closer to Machwa. "Machwa, just tell the truth. No harm will come to you." The shopkeeper growled, pulled his club back, and looked at Saruth. "Traveler, are you responsible for this boy?" Saruth ignored him at first, and then lifted an index finger while perking his ears at Machwa. Machwa gathered his words and took a trembling breath as he looked at the floor. "I was going to, but I decided not to because I thought about what you'd say and about how I didn't need it." He looked up at Saruth. "I'm not hungry." He swallowed, reflecting on that, even as he was still hot with fear under his fur. Saruth looked at the men and gave a formal bow. "I beg forgiveness, friends. Machwa has had a difficult past and much hunger in it. The hands of the hungry grow an instinct to feed them. He hasn't stolen anything, so I ask if there is a way you will forgive him." The rich man looked at Saruth, lifted a brow, and then looked at Machwa. Saruth smiled at him. "I'd forgive him if it were me. Your coins are all there, are they not?" Checking his purse to assure himself it was full, the man shrugged and said to Machwa, "Be good, kid. Your buddy here won't always be there to help you out of trouble." He sauntered out, his tan tail lashing after him. Once he was gone from the place, the shopkeeper growled, "You just lost me some business. I've got mouths to feed." Saruth held his staff to one side and bowed again at the waist to the man. "Feed them you shall. I've come to buy from your establishment. Machwa here is with me, and he'll need a nice belt and knife, as well as a pan, eating tools, serving tools, a hammer, a small saw, and a backpack." With a dubious expression, the shopkeeper went about finding and bagging the other items in the backpack. The pack was a wonderful thing, Machwa realized. Barumish people didn't tend to have them. They more often used woven baskets and other forms of bags. "A wise choice buying your bag here, sir. We make the best packs in the world. Lighter than cathberry hide, twice as strong, made from woven Zarmuth gut by people in Wazella using a special method. It's waterproof, too." Saruth glanced around behind the counter. "Have you got a well-made flyback? We might have need of one." The shopkeeper shook his head. "No, traveler, for that type of magic thing you'll pay a pretty penny and have to go as far as Optanoth at least." Saruth nodded and paid the shopkeeper what he'd asked for the goods, getting another pack and 2 lengths of woven rope as well. Machwa had never seen so much money spent in one place, and said to Saruth as they left the shop, "Saruth, are you rich? You always seem to have money, and are never working." Saruth chuckled. "I've worked a great deal. Consider this me being on holiday travels, though there's much work to be done." Machwa nodded. Saruth, what's a flyback?" Saruth waved his hand. "It's a stick that flies back when you throw it, hence the name. They use them to kill fazoogas." Not being able to help himself, Machwa leaned closer. "Are they really magic?" Saruth stopped walking for a moment and regarded Machwa with an unsettling look. Eyebrow lifted as he seemed to formulate an answer over a short eternity. No. People say something is magic when they don't understand how it works or how to make it work. Your new backpack is waterproof and strong, yet very light. In some places people will consider that to be magic. But it's not magic, is it? Machwa's ears drooped. So there is nothing that is magic? Sarut turned and continued walking. He cast a smile over his shoulder. Oh yes, Machwa. Indeed, there are magic things. You are magic. Jehovah made you, and you are the only you that is or ever will be. If that's not magic, if the life within you that causes you to breathe and learn and ask such questions isn't magic, then I truly do not know what is. Machwa climbed into the cart as he pondered the answer. A smile soon spread over his face. Other than the odd insect or track in the road, the trip was uneventful for the rest of the day. The spice cake was almost gone, and Machwa looked forward to dinner as daylight turned to dusk. In the distance, beyond many bends in the road, lights seemed to touch the sky from the large city of Optinoth. As the cart rolled around the final bend in the raised road and the trees gave a clear view, Machwa couldn't help but gasp. Here, built on a mound of earth lifted from the wet ground, lay the last city on the road, named Optinoth in honor of sage Optin. The sounds of the night swamp, the insects and distant screeches, growls and howls of creatures in the night seemed to fade as they grew nearer the city. Like Baruma's city, this one had lamps that were lit each evening, as well as water towers that kept and collected clean rainwater. Optinoth was so much like Machwa's hometown, yet so different. The people here didn't wear tunics and pantaloons. Most wore robes of flowing silk cloth, but some wore loincloths, leaving most of their pelts exposed. It wasn't just the men who did it either, but the women too, although they also wore a wrapping of cloth over their bosoms. Some wore jewelry that looked quite expensive, and most carried animal claws or fangs on cords about their necks or fashioned into their clothing. One man in particular caught Machwa's eye as he walked by, his dark caramel-colored fur making a stark counterpoint to his red loincloth and the tied red strands of silk wrapped about his hands. Around one eye he had bright blue paint in the shape of a flower, and over his chest were other shapes flowing down from the paint on his face. A white fang hung about his neck by a leather cord. He stopped walking and nodded as they went by, and gave Machwa a smile for his curiosity. Sarut nodded back. "Passage?" The man pointed down the street and gave a nod. "One night after this next night." The smells of a local candy and pastry shop seemed to reach right out into the street and grab Machwa by the nose. Curious young ladies with fur that had black swirls and caramel background paused in their walk to note Machwa as the cart passed and offered him shy smiles. It felt good. He realized he had missed the city. When they stopped at the inn, Sarut made arrangements to sell their cart and Sebastian to the innkeeper. The lumbering Cathberry was a comfort to Machwa. "But why? I like Sebastian. Did he do something wrong?" Sebastian lowed and gazed back at him with a look of mild concern. "From here on, Sebastian would be most uncomfortable. We're at the end of the path and must take a boat or a tortanga from here. Cathberries can't swim very well, Machwa." Machwa nodded and helped unharness Sebastian one last time. He rubbed the lowing beast where the straps had been and was gifted with a nuzzle in return. Sarut got them a small room upstairs in the corner of an inn, with a balcony overlooking a busy winding street. It was ornate and well furnished, with a large bath and soft beds. Machwa looked over the room, moving around it and inspecting the footh towels and bedding. There were aromatic soaps and candles and a bowl of fruit as well. "Doesn't a room like this cost a lot? It sure is nice, Sarut."
"Well, Machwa, we might be here a few days while I make arrangements for a boatman or sage. I hope to find the sage we saw earlier. We should take some comfort while we can, if it will be a while."
Machwa remembered the man who had nodded and smiled. He wondered why he was dressed like that. He moved to sit on one of the beds. "Was he the one with the red cloth and the paint?" Sarut nodded. Machwa licked his nose and perked his ears. "Is he like you, Sarut?" Sarut paused, one ear tipping to the side as he pondered the question.
"Your question could mean many things, but I believe the answer is in the affirmative. He uses his mind for wondrous things, so he is much like me in that way. I find it probable that he could also show you how to use a flyback."
Machwa nodded.
sitting up and watching the street. His golden eyes showed a deep curiosity. Sarooth chuckled at his ward's expression and eased into a plush chair. In my youth I would have given much to have the opportunity to travel as you do. Not many do. Machwa gave a nod while he leaned against the rail overlooking the street and peered down at a lamp. He rolled the pebble in his hand. The warm, moist, still air of the town seemed to suffocate Machwa. Its thickness seemed greater now that his mind was on it. "I wish there was a sea breeze or something. It's hotter here than at home." Sarooth stood and walked to the balcony to look around down on the street for a moment. He cleared his throat before he began to sing. Let winds so fresh surround this place, impart a breeze and fill this space, to cool those warm and leave no trace of stagnant air or grumpy face. Fly, fly, wind of the night, come forth to this inn for Machwa's delight. Sigh, sigh, storm clouds delight, the cool wind blow without rain tonight. At first nothing happened, but then Sarooth pointed his staff to the heavens above, and a cool breeze drifted down over the inn. The wind whipped a wonderful chill down the neck of Machwa's tunic. Sarooth left his staff on the balcony, but covered its top with a small leather bag to hide the soft illumination of its glowing crystal. With a grin he reclined in his bed. Sleep well, Machwa. Machwa stared at Sarooth, looked at the staff, and then looked back at Sarooth. How did you— No questions about that now. But do you want me to stop it? Sarooth narrowed his eyes. Machwa snorted and shook his head, then looked up at the sky where there was a small hole in the cloud cover. He sighed as he basked in the cool wind, stripped down to his loincloth and tunic alone. He got the idea to move his bed then, and with grunting and scraping he dragged it to the balcony. Sarooth gave a curious look, but just grinned when Machwa caught him looking. With a happy sigh, Machwa pulled his sheets up to his chin and looked up at the stars through the hole in the clouds above. He wasn't sure when, but after a time his eyes closed and he greeted slumber with a smile. Scrackles chittered. They always seemed to wake him up. Machwa opened one eye and looked up 2 feet away to where a dark brown scrackle was perched on the rail of the balcony. It was chirping up a storm. Machwa groaned and covered his head with his sheets. The creature did a double take and ran off wailing in terror. That didn't help the noise level. Sarooth walked over to Machwa's bed and took his staff from beside it. As the man stretched, he growled out a pleased sound. Machwa mumbled from under his covers, "I don't know what's worse, you or the Scrackles." There was a trademark laugh of good humor. "Count your mornings a joy. You never know when you're seeing your last one. No one does." "Oh, yeah? Are you going to keep making noise enough to kill me?" Sarooth licked his nose, and a wicked grin spread on his face as he looked up at the sky. "I've often thought it would prove interesting to try that cool wind song, but with a bit of rain in it. With focused raining all in one spot, it would be a fascinating deluge to behold. Don't you believe that'd be impressive, Machwa?" In a shuffle of covers, Machwa exploded out of the bed, zipped into the room, and wrapped himself in his cloak. I'm up! I'm up!" Sarooth's laughter filled the room.